this afternoon, we are very fortunate to have quite an incredible group of people. I saw Erica already. I think Erica is here already. There's Mike. Erica Telly. Yes, there she is. I keep on going. People might be imagining that there is an Erica somewhere in the world. I keep on calling your name Erica. Good morning. Okay, so so we need we Vivek, we only need Susan. I hope she's not having some issues. I resent, as I said, I
Susan messaged me. She will be with us shortly. So
okay,
please
perfect.
continue.
Yep. Thank you, Vivek. Okay, who do we have with us today? Of course, we have our esteemed chair for IRMS, Ren Lemming. I'm here as well. Very happy that James Labin can join us from Loughborough University. Um, a lot of you follow James a lot. Very interesting with all his interesting blogs, posts, and webinars. We have from Microsoft Erica Telly this afternoon, and thank you. Erica is, um, you know, is one of the main drivers now with our camp for records management, and we're so happy that she's with us. Roberto is sending his apologies because he's got a conflict. But Erica is here who will be representing Microsoft. We will have very shortly Susan Lamb from Shell International, and with that thing, joining Susan with the Shell approach is Vivek Bhatt of Infotection for is the city of Infotection. Uh, okay, who helped Shell International with their records management and their move and that project. The Capstone Approach, the one that everybody is so curious about, have been asking me nonstop. So we're very happy that we have Beth, Cron, and Kevin DeVorsey from NARA, who will give us the regulatory overview. And we searched high and low for Joel Westphal. Some of you would be familiar with him from our IRMS conference in Wales. We found him at NARA. He is one of the deputy directors now um, at the Gerard Ford Library, and Susan is here, so there we go. And after that, we will have an open discussion um, and identify some of the issues for cab and closing, especially if it is something that we could bring into the cab with Erica, and then we can move forward if it is something that if there is something that we could identify there. Now, let me give the floor to Ren. One of the things that we will have to ask is for each presentation, if we have questions with regards to your presentation, please tell us if we could just interject and ask those questions, or if you want to leave them at the end, please tell us that. So, Ren.
Maria, thank you very much. So, hello everyone. Hello and a big welcome to all our speakers, and thank you, and a big welcome to all our guests. So, I'm personally very excited by this one. Well, email is such a huge consideration and perhaps issue to every organisation, and it will be fascinating to explore both its use and its governance, and a variety of options today. And the only other thing I wanted to say, of course, is as with other roundtables and events, this is the start of a conversation. So we look forward to seeing your thoughts and contributions in the chat as well. As Maria said, we'll just take those to transcribe particular things that will be valuable going forwards and then delete it. But this is the start of a conversation, the start of even building requirements that we can discuss further with Microsoft, etc. So I'm now going to say thank you very much. I'm going to sit back and I'm going to enjoy this. Thank you, Maria.
Thank you, Ren. So for those who are not speaking at the moment, if you wish to remove your video at the moment, as we welcome our first speaker. So I will remove my video at the moment. James Lappin.
Thanks, Maria. Thanks,
Loughborough
Ren.
University. Okay.
Okay, find my slides. Oh, can you see my slides, or are you looking at my?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Great. Microsoft 365 has various applications that organize content in various different ways. And the applications that we find most challenging to manage are the applications that are individual centric, that give an individual a messaging account to message from, an email account to email from, or an account to accumulate documents in. And the reason why we find those challenging is that it's hard to set a precise retention rule on them, and it's hard to open them up to access to their successor or to any of their colleagues. So you would think then that email would be amongst the first priorities for us thinking about the application of machine assistance, automatic intelligence to help with this issue. But there's a paradox here, because email is a high risk, high volume and high value corporate data set. And those high risks, the high risks involved in acting on email, is risks delaying us thinking, talking and acting about how we involve the machine in solving this problem. So one of the things I'd like to do is just to start thinking about how could we safely apply machine learning in the email environment. How could we design a process by which we can transfer the knowledge that an individual end user has about their own correspondence to a machine model and enable that machine model to act in ways that support the end user, support records management, and which do not pose any risks to the end user's privacy, reputation, or interests. Okay. So I want to look first at the capabilities we need for managing email, then at the way the records management model is set up towards email currently, depending on end user action, then at the AI model in Microsoft 365, and then just to float some ideas about how we can start thinking through this process. We only need 3 capabilities with email. All we need to do to make email fully manageable is to be able to separate the correspondence within an email account that arises from the work and the role of the account holder from ephemeral, social, and reference email that person has received and sent. Secondly, we need to be able to distinguish within the business email of that individual the email arising from different types of activity they carried out. And thirdly, we need to be able to make links between the email of those different activities and the work, other content arising from that work in other applications within the cloud suite. Once we've done that, email accounts are fully manageable. Yeah, but we're a long way off that at the moment. If you look at Microsoft 365 now, what we have is a general records management model which treats every application equally, no harm in that, and which has a very simple idea, which is the idea that an administrator working from the compliance center can set default retention rules on any application, any aggregation of content within the whole suite, and can also make available to end users retention labels which the end users can use to highlight content that should be accepted from that default rule. And when we see how this actually works in practice in the email environment, we see that the chances of this actually working are quite slim. There's 2 points of failure. The first point of failure is that there are very few records management teams that are sufficiently large or working in organizations that are sufficiently small for them to be able to know for each individual end user what labels would actually prove a useful way of making distinctions within their email account. The second point of failure, likely point of failure, is the end users themselves, because in order to apply these emails, they have to, first of all, there's no indication in the user interface of their email account that they could or should label any of their email. If they find the right menu under the three dots, they will see an option which says they can assign a policy. And if they click on that, they will be given the list of labels. And if they understand those labels, and if they see a point to applying them, then they can apply them to an individual email that they've related to them. I think there's about 1 in 100 chance of the records manager being able to understand what labels they should push out. 1 in 100 chance of each individual thinking it's worth applying these labels. So that's about a 1 in 10,000 chance of someone consistently labeling their emails according to these labels. So how then do we invoke AI? Because Microsoft also has an AI model in its suite. And there's 2 types of machine learning that's coming into the suite. The first type is the type that Microsoft puts into the suite through things like Microsoft Viva, which you don't have to do anything to do. They will supply it. And what's happening there is that signals, every time an end user makes an action in any of the applications, it updates a Microsoft graph. Oh, someone's emailed someone else about some topic, therefore they must be both must be interested in this topic, and this is a live topic, and that can drive things like search results and recommendations, and can even drive topic cards and about the particular topics that the organization is interested in. Okay, that model is great, but it can only go so far, because Microsoft can't break your access retention model. So where you've got large amounts of volume locked in email accounts, this model cannot surface them to anyone who wasn't copied into those emails, right? And therefore, Microsoft AI, and there's nothing Microsoft can do to solve that for us. We can only unlock some of that content if we can implement AI in a way that's driven by our organizations and that maintains and builds the trust of our end users. So Microsoft are also providing us with what they call trainable classifiers, whereby an administrator, i.e. us, can train a classifier to identify a particular type of content. So it's aimed at really specific things, like specific types of document where you could get 50 of those documents, show the machine what they're like, get another couple of hundred good examples, couple of hundred bad examples, show the machine what good and bad examples look like, and then test it. And then when you as an administrator are happy, you can publish it out, and then you can use it to help train retention labels to look for that content and apply a retention label. This model is not very well adapted to the email environment. And because in the email, this envisages, this is good, for example, where a type of document is always the same wherever you find it in the system, like a CV. Yeah, once it can recognize a CV, doesn't matter where it is, whether it's an email account or in a SharePoint site, it can recognize it. But what we have with email, if one of the key distinctions we want to make is between business email and non-business email of any specific user, that dichotomy will change from user to user. If I'm in an operations department, an email from the marketing department is non-business. It's just reference. They're just telling me something. If I'm in the marketing department, it's part of my business. Yeah. So we cannot, as a central point, train a machine classifier like that to distinguish between business and non-business emails. We have to proceed on an email account by email account basis. Yeah. So I think this model will be much better for starting to work in the email environment and starting to get over the fears that people will have once we start talking to people about applying machine learning in their email account. I think, yes, we need, it's a type of trainable classifier model, but it's not driven by the administrator. It's if we can persuade the end users to make simple tagging decisions, for example, a simple dichotomy between their business and non-business email. And if we can persuade them to do that for a short period of time, yeah, just enough time to get a couple of 100 or 300 emails tagged, then the next stage is, once we've hit that number, to get the machine to take over the making that dichotomy, to tag the business versus non-business emails in that particular instance. And we need to reassure the user that the machine learning will be working within their email account, and it wouldn't be no consequences would come from that classification until they, as the end user, indicate that they are happy with the accuracy of the machine learning classification, and they are happy for access and/or retention rules to be influenced or changed by that machine classification. Yeah. If we were to proceed like this, we could proceed in parallel across all email accounts of our organization. We would have the fact that email is split up by individuals, instead of it being a disadvantage, with machine learning, it might even be an advantage, because every individual would be a control point. Every individual would be able to tell us whether in their email account the machine tagging was sufficiently accurate for us to use it for our governance purposes. And if we were to be able to, with machine learning, the process is more important than the algorithms. The algorithms are 2 a penny. The important thing is the process by which you ensure it's safe. The outcomes are safe, the consequences are safe. Once you establish this process and you establish that trust, you can then start to be to do more. You could say to a user, hey, every end user can have 9 different ways of dividing up their email account into different activities. They can define it. The end user can define what those 9 ways are. The machine can take over. We repeat, and once we've done that, and we know which end users are satisfied with the clustering of their email into different activities, then we can start to bring in our corporate governance frameworks. Any questions?
I'll ask a question. This is Erica from Microsoft.
Hi, Erica.
First of all, love this presentation, and I would definitely love to talk to you more about this after the meeting.
Great. Thanks, Erica.
Yeah. I'm curious, like, when you're first seeding the model and asking user to tag the documents, do we trust that they understand the records management policies well enough to tag correctly the first time? Or what are your thoughts there?
I think it's our job as records managers to understand our records management policies, frameworks, retention rules. I don't want the end users to be bothered by that. That's not the type of knowledge I want from them. What I want is their knowledge of their email account, because that's the knowledge that we don't have and they have. So what I don't want is, I don't want to ask the end user to make decisions on how long things should be kept. I want them to make allocations to, this is this, or this is that, this is the other, and we as records managers make the decision. Okay, you've said that's your business email, therefore we as an organization corporately make a decision on what happens to that when you go. That's not your decision. We'll decide how long to keep it, but we need you to decide, well, in this case, where's that boundary between business and non-business?
Oh, okay, so the machine learning is only defining that boundary, not the individual record categories.
What I see the machine learning as being, I don't see it as being an instant solution. I see it as being a pathway. So I've only spoken about end user being training machines to make some very basic distinctions within the email account. The sophisticated point would be by what records managers can then do with those distinctions. We can build corporate classifications. That's what we've been trained to do. What in the past, those corporate classifications have been no use towards email, because we haven't found a routine way of grouping emails in way that we can apply our classification. See what I mean?
I see.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah, if it's okay, I'll email you after this, and maybe we could have another chat. Thank you.
Please.
James, it's Ren.
Hi, Ren.
Hello, well done, brilliant, love it, and I love your cartoon approach. Thanks. To slides. If only I could draw so well. There's some stuff going on in the chat.
You can, Ren. Everyone can draw, you know that.
I know. There's some stuff going on in the chat. One's not a question; it's more a commentary, really. That it sounds great, but it's then the challenge of getting all those users to go through that process of starting to label and the machine learning from. There's one specific question, though, that says, what you say is interesting, but this is only about retention. Why are we trying to manage email in Outlook?
Well, you've got a choice, yeah? And you'll see through the meeting, we'll have Susan and Vivek talk about managing email in other corporate systems. That's a perfectly valid option. The reason when I came up with those three capabilities is, if you had those three capabilities, you could do either. If you had the capability to distinguish business email from non-business email and to distinguish different types of business email, you could do anything with it, couldn't you? You could run routines to move the business activity email to somewhere else, or you could leave it in the email account and manage. You'd have a completely free choice, and I want us to have a good choice. What I think we've got at the moment is not a great choice, is it? Because at the moment we can say to individuals, move your email out of email accounts, and we know that they'll move a few emails but hardly anything. Or we can manage emails within email account, and then we've got the problem of personal, social and ephemeral email, which we find very difficult to distinguish, isolate and manage. Yeah. But you'll hear from both options throughout the course of the meeting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know there are stats when the drag and drop to EDRM was the thing that only a very small percentage typically were successfully, weren't they? Sorry, and I'm aware the clock is ticking. I'll just mention one more thing I've seen. Is this down to types of container, Exchange Online or SharePoint Online, ? But I'm not sure if that's part of the thread above, which is about having default labels. So I'm not sure if that's actually a question, really. If you
okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. We will probably discuss it a little bit more. So Exchange Online is managing email, where it came from. But SharePoint, I know what SharePoint is there because there are some people who basically drag and drop their email into SharePoint to make it into a record. That is probably the scenario there. However, moving on along, thank you so much, James. There's still a
Thank
lot of
you.
discussions that we'll have along the way.
Great.
So next, we have, before we get into the approaches and as to how they try to manage it, we are now giving the floor to Erica Telly at Microsoft. Why Microsoft? All of us, 80% of us are in Outlook. I couldn't, I hope I could say that I am not dependent on it, but like everybody else, I cannot move without it. So let us welcome Erica from Microsoft. Thank you, Erica.
Thank you so much. So as a part of this email-centric roundtable, we wanted to tell you about a new feature that we're going to have coming out soon. Technically, it's still under NDA, but Roberto and I talked, and this opportunity was way too important to miss. So I guess I'll just ask, please don't screenshot this or blog about it or tweet about it, but you're welcome to discuss it with your colleagues. I'm also going to be watching the chat, so please post your questions throughout and I can respond to them real time if it makes sense. So as we've kind of touched on in the last presentation, and I'm sure in the future presentations, we have a lot of containers to manage in Microsoft 365. Email, of course, is one very important container. And it sometimes makes sense to just manage things that are in SharePoint or manage things that are just in your email. But that's a very siloed approach, and it may not work for every situation. One situation I'm thinking of is if you want to take an individual-based management strategy, where you want to manage the individual's content rather than the container's content. So what we're going to announce, and we'll mention it in a blog on May 19th with a link to sign up for our private preview program, which is the ability where you can test this out in a test tenant. It will not be ready for production. It's just for you to test. And then based on how that goes, we'll release it for general use, usually 2 to 3 months later. So how these scopes work is it's going to allow you to say, I only want this retention policy to apply to a subset of SharePoint sites. Or I want it to apply to this project SharePoint site, these project email accounts, these Teams, and these OneDrive accounts. Well, how do we do this? So we are allowing you to do attribute-based boundaries to define when a policy should apply. I have a slide next that shows the different attributes you can use. But think about it when you hover over somebody's name in Microsoft 365. It brings up a card with information about them. Things like maybe their department or their job title, maybe the office that they sit in. We know things about this user from that profile. So we can use those attributes to scope if a policy should apply to them. So as an example, you could say, if the person lists their department as finance and they list their country as UK, then this policy would apply. You may have, if you work in Microsoft 365 today, you may have noticed that when you select a location, you can include or exclude email or different locations by listing them out individually, but there's limits. You can only add 1,000 sites to the policy or 1,000 email inboxes or email accounts. So this adaptive scope is a way to get around those limits if you want to scope your policy differently. So those limits will not apply when you use the adaptive scopes. And additionally, this now is a request we've heard for a long time. We're also adding a new policy lookup tool where you can put in, say, a user's email account, and it'll tell you what retention policies apply to that account. So it's a way to double check your work. Of the attributes we're supporting at launch, we really heavily, of course, invested in the user because the main thing we hear is people want to be able to easily do capstone email where they want to have a certain retention policy that applies to a subset of users. So these are the attributes that will be available, but I'll also note that you do have the ability to add up to 15 custom attributes. So if there's something you want to use to scope the policy that isn't on this list, you could work with your Exchange admin to add it as a custom attribute. These custom attributes are shared across all the workloads in Microsoft 365. So if your Exchange admin may be using some of these attributes for something else. So you may not have access to all 15, you may. So if you use a user attribute, then you can apply it to these locations. So it still is very, individual centric. So Teams chats, the private channel messages, Yammer user messages. It will not apply to, say, the user's messages in a group team chat where it's a permanent team. It won't apply to their actions in SharePoint, as an example. So that is a limitation I wanted to make sure everybody understood. We can also use this with Microsoft 365 groups, although I don't hear about those as much, honestly, from the records managers. And then for sites, the sites is going to be one that we're going to have to work on together, to be honest, because when we'd have to bake the site attributes or site properties into a provisioning process so that when you create the site, the user would maybe select the department or the country or certain attributes that you want to use to manage retention policies. And then it would write them to an area of SharePoint called the property bag, which is indexed by search. I'm going to be developing a lot of content about this, but it's something I'm definitely going to need further feedback from this group in the future. So at launch, I think it's going to be most useful for users right away for records managers. Is there a question? All right. So let's look at what this looks like in the user interface. Please keep in mind that, again, this is pre-release code, so this will change a little bit. I just like to point that out. So here we are in the information governance solution, and you see we have a new tab called Adaptive Scopes. You can see some scopes I've already created. I'm going to click Create Scope. It's going to ask me to create a name for the scope. I'm going to click Next. And then it'll ask, do I want to create a scope parameter for users, sites, or groups? And that's where I can build my logic. Now I can add conditions, I can group them together. And it also gives me the result down here just to be super clear about what you're creating. So you do the drop downs and build the and or logic. You can also use an advanced view if you're, have a wizard that wants to actually script this out instead of, or write this out in a query language instead of using the wizard. So we provide both a kind of user-friendly option and an IT-friendly option. Then I would build the scope. So now I have the list of scopes that are available. And so I'm going to go and use them in a retention policy. So I'll click New Retention Policy. And I'll name it. And then here I'll ask if I can use a dynamic scope or a static scope. The static scope is what we have today. I'll choose dynamic scope. And here you'll see we now have this piece at the top that asks us to select from that list of scopes that we've built previously. So I would click Add Scope. It'll bring up the list. I'll check the box next to them. You can't quite see it in the screenshot, but there's a box you can check, and then you can click add. Oh, there it is. So now I have this, and then it'll automatically turn off the locations where this scope couldn't apply because it's a user scope. So I can decide, does this only apply to email, or do I want to use it in OneDrive and other places as well? And then you set your usual retention settings and finish that off. Now, a couple things before I get asked. We don't officially tell you what the licensing is until we're through the private preview program. However, it's going to be an advanced compliance feature. So you'll need the E5-ish licenses to use this. And then also you can, even though I just showed this in a retention policy, you'll be able to use it for a retention label policy as well. And then if you have any other questions, yeah, please put them in the chat. So that was my whirlwind tour of this feature. But because we really wanted to build it for email mostly, I did want to make sure that we knew about it for the purposes of this discussion. So thank you so much for the time to talk about it. If you have any questions, feel free to come off mute or put them in the chat.
Thank you, Erica. So it's a new feature that is still under covers from Microsoft. So that is an exclusive for everybody who is here. So it's an additional tool that we could use to help manage email. Probably something we need to get our head around still. However, there are those of us who, like our next speaker, Susan Lamb at Shell International, and Vivek Bhatt, had to proceed with the tools and with the capabilities that are available to them at that time when they needed to be able to do something to help them manage email. And with that, I would like to introduce Susan Lamb of Shell International. And Vivek, are you joining Susan?
Yes, I'm sharing my presentation that we prepared.
Okay. Susan, say hello. I saw you briefly. We didn't see you.
Yes, I've got my camera on. Hello. Can you see me, everyone?
No, not yet. Okay, I can see Vivek.
Oh, well, my camera is on. Let me try again.
Yep. Yes, we see you now, Susan. It's very good to see you. So I'm handing the floor over to you.
Just take that off. Hold on. Take this off. Yeah.
Very COVID appropriate.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, so I'll just do a quick presentation just to tell you about what we've been doing at Shell. Obviously, we joined you last year about this time as well, just to tell us we were obviously a year away from what we were doing. And just quick introduction, I'm Susan Lamb. I'm the Group Record Manager from Shell, and I sit in the league. I'm a qualified UK solicitor, and basically am the subject matter expert for the group for retention and disposal of all information, not just emails. And I am the product owner for our Microsoft Office 365 Compliance Center retention functionality. And we've been working on a pretty big program over the last 4 years probably, to basically really have a step change in our information management compliance, particularly, but not specifically, but from my perspective, particularly in the area of making sure we keep the right information, which are our records, and then we get rid of the rest, such as personal data that we shouldn't be keeping. Because I think you have to have been under a rock these days if you didn't know and understand what the GDPR obligations it places on people like us. And as an organisation, we're not very good at deleting. So there you go. So just specifically relating to emails, we have, it's a tricky, knotty problem. I think we all struggle. We all of us, I wonder. And as Maria, I think you said, we all live in emails. I mean, I'm a lawyer, and lawyers just live in Outlook, basically. So we absolutely had to think about how we're going to get our arms around this. And so as an aspiration and a future vision, we definitely see more collaboration and communication going on via Teams, particularly in the conversations, and that's definitely well, we're definitely seeing that as a pull from the business, which is great, and we've got some really good examples within. Well, particularly in our projects and technology business, particularly a group that deal with the wells, they have really taken Teams on board and pretty much, I mean, I think pretty much eliminated email from their work. Obviously, can't eliminate it entirely because you have to have the whole world do that. But generally, their projects and their collaboration is all based in Teams. And ultimately, I think that's the vision we have across the landscape. But we're well away from that for now. So obviously, have to do something in the meantime. And as I say, we absolutely have to get our hands on and our arms around retention management. So the functionality that we've just been shown obviously wasn't available, and what was available for us we had to use, and that's shared mailboxes. So we've leveraged shared mailboxes to provide a place for people to keep emails that they believe are of business value, and we have engaged and rolled out a huge change management program to enable people to understand what we require of them. And it's basically, if they need an email, if they need to keep an email, it falls in the definition of a business record, then they need to put it in an appropriate shared mailbox, which we pretty much all the way through have set up with default labels. So they don't have to decide on a retention period. We definitely do not ask people to do that specifically. It's based on the type of content it contains. And then the shared mailbox will be set up with an appropriate retention label for that content, and people know where to put it. And that's where they keep their records. And really looking at longer term for inboxes to be of, well, short-term storage for emails. And we are basically and have just implemented a retention policy on people's personal mailboxes for 3 years. And we have definite aspirations to shorten that further once the organisation's got used to 3 years, which has been a challenge. But I could talk about that another time, perhaps. Okay, next slide, please, Vivek. Oh yeah, so just that's all managed by automatic retention policies. So some of the key principles that we've used and have guided us through that is that we as a company have made the decision we have information management as a requirement in our code of conduct, and we will only allow information to be kept long term in shared spaces or collaborative collections, if you like. We do not allow people to label information as records in any personal space, and that means things like their OneDrive, but obviously in this context, their personal email space. Now, that is because a principal perspective, this is company information. It's not personal information that they need to keep. And as you can imagine, in a company like us operating in over 80 countries with the diversity that we have a lot of movement around the company. We have a lot of sort of movement in between our joint venture partners, for example, where people are seconded in and out of joint ventures. And it's just not appropriate that they carry with them long-term records of the company when all those transitions happen. If you can imagine, if you've got change role 10 say a role could happen more, why should they have records relating to their old role in their inbox, being able to access them? So information is corporate information, needs to be in a shared space. So we've definitely number 2 used all our labeling functionality across the platforms, and really use the benefits of default labeling to make sure that it's as easy as possible for end users. Because ultimately, in my view, this is where it all hangs. It has to be useful. Sorry, it has to be easy and user friendly for people to do, and that's our ultimate aim. And using labels, people can manually apply labels if they need to, but in generally most environments, particularly as I said, shared mailboxes, we've applied default labeling to allow people to do it easily. And then, as I said before, we have implemented what we call a non-record disposal policy. So we have spent, as I say, quite a lot of time and effort educating our staff on what is a record, and they need to label that information as a record, not by choosing a retention period, but by deciding on what it is, and then put that email in a shared mailbox. And that has then allowed us to disposal policy of shared mailboxes and user mailboxes as well. So the default is, but everything else, if it's a record, gets kept according to our retention schedule, which is our big bucket approach to retention. And similarly with Teams, we absolutely realise that we have to give people nowhere to hide. If people will find places to squirrel away their information, so you can't just implement an automatic retention policy or deletion policy in one place, because people will just move everything to another place. So that's why we have been comprehensive in where we're implementing the policy. And then, yes, implementing governance across all the different shared platforms, and make sure that we have really defined structures so that we manage all the information through its life cycle, and we're clear on who owns information. And we have obviously a set of framework documents cascading down from our code of conduct into our what we call an IM manual, and that clearly sets out accountabilities and responsibilities for that ownership of information that we can then trace through and take appropriate action if it's not adhered to. And then I think, Vivek, is it the last one, or have we got one more? Maybe I should pause there, actually, Vivek, and pause there. And what would you like? You add what would you like to build on in terms of from your perspective from the technical side?
I'm just reading some questions which are coming up, so I'll probably pick them up. So yes, there were some challenges related to senior managers or senior executives who have emails which wouldn't necessarily fit into shared mailboxes. So for those, we used in shared mailboxes the use of private folders with specific permissions, and also used encryption. So use of SMIME encryption for those encrypted emails, which can stay in those shared spaces, but only accessible to individuals who have participated in those emails, or the recipients of those emails.
Okay, so there's some other questions. Shall I just finish and then we can come back to the questions, and maybe you can just create the questions so that I can't work out where we've got to in those. Well, look, again, I could talk for quite a long time on this, because there have been challenges to this. In the shared mailboxes, solution does have limitations. So obviously we have a gigabyte limit, and that is, I think, exacerbated if someone is on hold, because obviously none of their information then gets deleted by NRD because it's on hold. And I think I don't know the technicalities, but Vivek could enlighten us further if we liked. But that adds to the limit, contributes to the limit for the gigabyte. So there is some limitations on shared mailboxes in that perspective, but there are also avenues of archived mailboxes that we are almost certainly going to be using in the future, though we haven't done that just yet. Yes. So Outlook Web Access is really the interface that we have had to encourage people to use, both to do their cleanup of their emails, because if you can imagine, we've had to encourage people to label old emails that they haven't labeled, and you can imagine that some of those go back, well, I've been at Shell 20 years, so it's quite a lot for me to look at. And access is not it's particularly user friendly, I would say. It's and people aren't used to it, you know. Getting people to actually find Outlook web access is actually a bit of a challenge. But actually, once you get used to it, it's like everything. Once you get used to it, of course, in the client, you can only see a year's emails if that's where our cache is set to anyway. It's just a year, and so for anything older than a year, people have had to go back into Outlook web access. And I think it is the recommended approach to use Outlook web access for records management when you use shared mailboxes anyway, because of different syncing issues and stuff. So that is a challenge as well. But I mean, yeah, changing user behavior, change management. Well, where do I start? It's enormous, just enormous. I mean, explaining to people they have to do it and the imperative behind it. Then getting them on board with understanding what their information is in their emails and persuading them that actually, most people only need to keep a small percentage of their emails. And when you really ask them, they're keeping them as a comfort blanket. Oh, in case I need them. And that's been a challenge. And I suppose ultimately we've accepted the risk of over retention in that area as well. There's almost certainly we've kept in some areas too many because people can't let go. But the change management, as I said, I could have a whole hour on that, 2 hours on that. And just waiting and working with Microsoft on the functionality and waiting for gaps in functionality that we would like to see to make it easier is something that we're working with and working through all the time, constantly improving things. And sometimes we've wanted things quicker than we could have had them, and vice versa. So, all these things you have to balance up. But, at the end of the day, there is never a good time. I said this to someone the other day. It's never a good time to have children, and it's never a good time to implement NRD, non-record disposal, on people. It really isn't. But with the regulatory environment imperative that we have, we absolutely couldn't push this down the road anymore. And I'm pleased to say that we've come out the other side, and amazingly the sky hasn't fallen in, has it, Vivek? People haven't, the world hasn't ended. But I'm really pleased. Let's have a look at your questions. Vivek, is there any questions? Because I don't want to go.
I think there was a question of did you end up holding information about one subject in two places with this approach? I think the answer is that no, because we encourage people to move emails instead of copy emails. So as part of that process, it made sure that when people are filing their emails or tagging them in different folders, it's a move operation and hence doesn't leave any trace behind in the folders.
Yeah, that's true. And there is functionality that you can deduplicate. So when you have an email that has lots of string, you can we encourage people to deduplicate first by using that functionality in Outlook. And but I mean, in a company as large as Shell, often the same piece of information can be kept for different purposes. And it's all about the context of the information for that particular purpose and that particular business process. And there is almost certainly, I wouldn't call it duplication because it's not technically duplication. It's just the same information but being used for different things. And so, we get that with documents, and yes, you certainly get it with emails as well. But that doesn't concern us because, as I say, there are different purposes that people keep information for. Some people may keep something because it's for reference, whereas the receiver of an email, that same email, may keep it because it's an actual approval, but because it contains lots of other useful information, someone might keep it for reference. So that's how we approach this.
I think one point to probably also add is that we also did some initial study and analysis to figure out what would be the expected percentage of emails which would qualify as records or end up as records, and we use that to encourage users to make sure that they have a number in mind, which is an organizational reference. So, and we actually actively reported against those emails which were being filed by people because they were in shared mailboxes. So we could actually, we had the permission and the APIs, graph APIs, etc., which James mentioned earlier on, could actually look into those shared mailboxes, and we could create statistics on per shared mailbox, which is assigned to a business or a team, how many emails were they filing as records, and gave us the ability to, as people were preparing, to use those insights to actually cross-check, cross-verify with those businesses as to whether there are any practices because of which people are over-declaring. So we always kept a check on how obviously growing throughout this entire process.
Yeah, I'm just looking through. I can't see any other questions, but obviously if you want to come off mute, that's also fine.
They are thinking through it.
Yeah, kind of stun them into
They're
silence. They're so
amazed.
shocked
Yeah.
at the whole prospect of what we've done.
Yes. And the fact that you've done it. Well, Shell has always been leading the way to say, oh, they've done it. So
Yeah.
let's look at the details and see if we can do the same. There are some feedback as well with Stephen Lemon with regards to the way they've handled it. It's a 3-month rule in their systems. So it's so that perspective is more having that clarity, ensuring that you communicate it clearly, and then following through with the action that's needed, and people will follow through. And from what you've mentioned, Susan, a lot of that was difficult, but then you communicated really well, and you followed through on what you said you were going to do as well.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think we'd had, I don't think it's breaking any secrets to say we had a couple of goes at this. We'd had IT had a go. I mean, it's laughable, really. About 5 years ago, they just sent an email out to everyone saying, we're going to switch this on, and in a month's time. And I mean, that was obviously retracted very quickly, and there's no way that was just pie in the sky. It was never going to happen. And we didn't have the buy-in from the relevant people within the company. And so I think you need an alliance between IT, legal, and the business. I don't think you can do it without those three things. And I think the key thing that we had, which was different this time, was that we had the business. We had senior people in the business championing this. And so, people don't like to listen to lawyers, and see it as a bit of a, oh gosh, you're telling us what to do. IT is a bit the same. But when you've got your business leader saying you've got to do this, that's really powerful.
Yeah.
And we had that, and that really made a difference to getting traction and showing that we were serious.
Yeah, about this implementation. Yes, thank you so much. I think there's quite a number of questions there that I will leave with you, Susan and Vivek. Suddenly there was a deluge of questions. So
please carry on. I'm responding to those in the chat.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you, Vivek. And thank you very much, Susan, for this one. I am starting to think this 1 hour and a half it's too short for everything that we need to discuss, that we need to have a very specific round tables with each and every one of you, just so we could get into the details and all that, and exchange scenarios. But thank you so much, Susan. I will leave you with the questions. That was we really appreciate that. And with that, of course, we are now introducing another approach, which most of us have been hearing about. Capstone, talked about in the records management world, and we're wondering, well, how does that work? Let us give you then. I am giving the floor to NARA. Everybody's from NARA. We have Beth, Cron, and Kevin. giving us an overview of that's our regulatory overview. And after that is, of course, Joel Westphal and his experience with implementing Capstone at Central Command and the U.S. Navy later on. So I'm giving the floor to NARA now with Beth and Kevin.
Hi, I am Kevin DeVorsey, and I'm here with Beth Cron, and we're going to give a brief overview of NARA's Capstone Approach to Email Management. I'll start off by mentioning that any opinions that we express here are our own and don't necessarily reflect official NARA policy. So who are we? National Archives and Records Administration is an independent federal agency. The Archivist of the United States is a presidential appointee. We have approximately 2,400 employees and 40 locations. And a little unusual for National Archives in that we also have responsibility for records management across our government. And so on one hand, some of those 40 locations are presidential libraries, and then others are federal record centers, and then we also have regional archives. I myself am located in New York City. We have a small regional facility here, and Beth is located in Michigan. We have a $380 million budget, and we are both in the office of the Chief Records Officer. So we are in the part of NARA that does records management for federal agencies, and we're in the division that does policy and outreach. I'm on with the Electronic Records Policy and Standards team, and Beth is on the Electronic Records Policy and Program Support team. And traditionally, the team I'm on, we have focused on developing the guidance that governs the transfer of permanent records from agencies to NARA. And Beth and I have been working closer and closer together because the work that we're doing is similar, although it takes place at slightly different points in the life cycle. So next slide. All right, so again, NARA is a little unusual in that we care for all of the records of the United States government. And we do that there's differing legislation that governs how records are cared for and ultimately transferred to the National Archives. There is the Presidential Records Act, which governs records from the White House. There are the Federal Records Act, which governs the approximately 250 federal agencies. We also have an agreement with Congress where we care for their records, but they're not accessioned into our holdings. Beth and I, and the topic of this discussion focuses in on federal records. We could point you to stuff on presidential records, and NARA as a organization has a lot of experience bringing in presidential email, which has contributed to our understanding of email and what we're doing on the federal side. So let's go to the next slide. All right. I asked Beth this morning, I was trying to remember when she was first hired. I was hired in 2010, and she's been with NARA since 2008. And so we've both been involved. On a personal level, I'm amazed at how much of my job has involved policies around email. I was hired originally in 2010 to work on NARA's transfer guidance to update it to reflect the fact that we had a digital repository. But early on, it was recognized that, well, early on in my career in 2010, that I think James did a wonderful presentation and laid out the difficulty in applying traditional records management techniques to email records. And so back in 2010, the National Archives, although we had old transfer guidance that did identify electronic file formats, due to the difficulty in managing email records, we simply weren't getting them. And the kind of default approach was to print them out and file them. You can look at this screen and see all of this guidance, and it fits under an umbrella of work that NARA's been doing with the Office of Management and Budget, trying to nudge agencies into an all electronic world. where electronic records are created electronically, they're managed and used electronically, and they're transferred to the National Archives electronically. So you can see here that there's been a lot of work very specific to email, and 2013, the original Capstone memorandum was released. We've updated it a few times. We'll share these slides, and these are all hyperlinks to these documents in case anybody's interested. But it's been a lot of work kind of finessing what we're telling agencies about Capstone and how to apply it. You can see over on the right-hand side, we've updated our general record schedules. We've put out success criteria for managing electronic records. And so we continue to focus on how can we improve records management as it applies to email. And if we go to the next slide, I mentioned that I was hired. Are you going to the next slide, Beth? There you go.
Yes.
I was hired, and I was part of the team that was tasked with updating NARA's transfer guidance. And what was in place had been there since 2003, 2004, and it did include email, but it was aimed at traditional records management. We had the benefit of we were updating the transfer guidance while we were developing the Capstone guidance, and so we were able to account for Capstone in it. And so you can see here that we did include PSTs and also MBOX. I'll point out that Capstone is optional, and so the majority of agencies now are going the Capstone route, but there are some agencies that are still doing traditional records management with email. So we are required to give options, and so we do have formats specific for individual messages. And that email also gets put into case file systems and things like that. I will point out, back when we were doing this in the early 2010s, there was much more diversity in the email systems that were being used across the government. NARA was using Novell GroupWise. I remember going to agencies and there was a lot of Lotus Notes still in play. There's been a lot of consolidation, as Maria pointed out, a lot more people using Exchange Server and Outlook. But due to the disposition periods, we still have to account for some of this older email because it hasn't been transferred to us yet. I'll also point out that our kind of preservation and records management approach is we preserve records, we don't preserve systems. There's been a lot of work with emulation going on, but we require that agencies identify permanent records, extract them from their system with sufficient metadata, and then transfer them to the National Archives. And so, Beth, I will turn it over to you to get into the theory.
Okay, so we'll talk about what Capstone actually is in theory. So it's the policy that says that those employees who are at the top of the organization and those with leading organizations within the larger organization, they may be Capstone. That is, their email would be kept permanently. And then everyone else would have temporary accounts and their email would be kept for 7 years, for example. So this was what we put in the Capstone policy. It came out in 2013. And as James mentioned earlier, there are options to manage email and there weren't always the best options. And so that is really why we came up with this Capstone policy, as Kevin said, to address the lack of email coming into the National Archives and to move away from paper-based processing. So in reality, NARA released a general record schedule at 6.1, and this is for Capstone email. And this came out in 2015 and is updated over time. And what this does is show agencies how to walk through applying to use the Capstone. There's a form that they can fill out that kind of going through who the employees might be, and then they can work with NARA to set up that schedule. And usually it will have 7-year or 3-year dispositions depending on the type of records, or depending on the type of positions. And you can see when we share this list, we keep a public listing of all the agency's capstone positions. And so that's on our website, and you can go and see the approach that agencies are using, whether they're using a traditional approach or using capstone. And we compile that based on all of the reporting that we do on an annual basis to see where agencies are and how they're doing. It's just a couple of lessons learned. I'm sure each of these would take quite a bit of time to go through. But when we were first exploring Capstone, it was important to think about the inventory of email systems, of email archiving systems. Agencies didn't always know how many email tools they were using, especially when you get to some of the larger departments or agencies that may have many different things going on within one agency. And you have to think about this over time as you're moving from one system to another. That email may be staying there. So you really have to think about what we call legacy email. Keeping track of capstone officials. This is a very challenging one, and why I think it's really promising what we're hearing today about the adaptive policies where you could keep track of capstone officials, because people may move in and out of roles, and you may know the time period, but you want to make sure that for the time that they were serving in that capstone position, that email is captured as permanent. Culling is a big topic. So at the National Archives, we are able to mark records as non-record. And I love the approach that James was describing about how you can train the system to be able to identify some of these. Would be a huge advance. And we are always trying to look at how to move all of that work of tagging and categorizing away from the end user and look at automating how it can be done. And obviously culling temporary versus permanent, how it's going to be done at the National Archives once it's transferred. Definitely a lot of lessons learned in this space. And then encryption is a big topic, and one that we are continuing to talk about, as there can be layers of encryption. In the US federal government, we have PIV cards, personal identity verification. And from NARA's perspective, we do not want any records transferred to us that are encrypted, because we won't be able to access them, provide access to the public for those records. And so agencies have to remove that encryption, and that could cause a lot of challenges. If it's encrypted, for example, in Microsoft 365, it could be decrypted, but if it has additional layers like that PIV card, we're going to have challenges. And then we're constantly looking at the development of new tools. We use Google at the National Archives, and just the other day our chat, it all changed, and so it's good to stay on top of what the changes are coming. And then we're talking about expanding Capstone to other electronic records. And as Kevin mentioned, we have a lot of different types of records that we manage at the National Archives, and scalability is definitely a concern. And really the test case for those right now are all of the presidential records that we take in the, I don't know the numbers of those, but in the hundreds of millions, I'm sure. So that's just a little bit about Capstone at the National Archives and some of the things that we've learned. And we'll be happy to jump into questions. Any questions you have are in policy@nara.gov. We'll get to the right people. So we have any questions, Kevin?
I am looking, but I
No, everybody's learning.
Okay. Learning
Everybody's
is good.
learning at the moment, trying to get that Capstone thing. They've heard about Capstone, but they're like, oh, okay. It's trying to digest that. Now, as they try to digest that, why don't we now introduce Joel Westphal, who will give us his tell us his experience about actually as a records manager at that time implementing Capstone and the challenges of that journey. Joel?
Well, I hope, excuse me, I hope everybody can hear me okay. Thank you for inviting me to talk about my experiences. I will reiterate what Kevin had said. I am here as a private citizen, and what I say does not reflect upon the United States government or the National Archives. I'm here to talk about my previous experience within the Department of Defense, at the U.S. Central Command, and the United States Navy. The first question I invariably get when I talk to people from the international community is, what is a Centcom? Central Command is a combatant command located in Tampa, Florida, which is the primary headquarters for the Middle East. It handles the conflict, handled the conflict in Iraq. It handled the U.S. conflict in Afghanistan outside of the NATO realm. It also has a command forward headquarters in Qatar. While there, I was the section chief for records management, information management, and electronic discovery. There's a couple of things that I have learned while there as a records manager, and I developed two essential maxims regarding records management. The first one is there is no such thing as a records management emergency. The second one is when you're being shot at, records management does not really rise to the level of importance. You cannot tell Private Jones or Lieutenant Daniel that they need to be able to manage their emails while they are in theater with their lives in danger. So that brought us down to kind of the track of how do we preserve this really kind of important set of records that were going to be coming back from theater, from Iraq, from Afghanistan, and saving them so they could eventually get to the public via the National Archives after the retention was up. And we had ingested back at headquarters, many terabytes of electronic mail. And what we had decided on was a kind of an approach, and again, this is kind of just pre-Capstone. This is around 2009, 2010 when Capstone was kind of originally being developed. And I'd like to give a shout out to someone who I believe is one of the best records managers in the federal government, and her name is Jean Plant. Jean Plant is the agency records officer of the United States Department of Justice. And it is my understanding that the vast majority of NARA's Capstone actually derived in many ways from the United States Department of Justice due to similar issues that they had there kind of in managing emails. So we kind of looked at that approach from the DOJ, and then we looked at how can we preserve these emails? And we decided that we are going to save everybody above a certain rank's emails permanently. And that was what we were going to do. We did not have the capacity to save, all of the emails. What we decided to do was look at that kind of Capstone approach, senior levels, and apply that. And then at that same time, when we were ingesting all these emails from Iraq and Afghanistan, we had another issue pop up. We had discovered that an individual who shall be nameless were kind of deleting emails, and this was a problem, not an emergency, a problem, and it was a problem we needed to solve right away. What we decided on was, again, this was pre-Capstone, in consultation with the Joint Staff, who was in consultation with senior records officials in the National Archives. worked on a solution. And my solution was to simply, in the background, using Microsoft Exchange, capture all of the emails who were being written or received by general officers, flag officers, or above. So basically your highest ranks in the U.S. military. All those individuals at Centcom essentially were capstoned. All the emails were then moved from Microsoft Exchange, and then I had a dedicated staff member who would migrate those emails directly into our electronic records management solution, TRIM, HP's TRIM. And that was going on for years up until the point I had left. Now, I can certainly say that based on what Kevin and Beth talked about, if you have a large agency, if your agency is like maybe not a Centcom. Centcom was a little easier to deal with. 4,000 people, not a huge issue. But when I went to the Department of the Navy, where I was responsible for over 900,000 records creators, then it became even more of an issue. And that's where Capstone and the NARA's development of Capstone really paid major dividends. No agency in the federal government has the technical capability to save and preserve, hundreds upon hundreds of petabytes of emails in perpetuity, hoping that one day they might get to the National Archives. So it's that segregation of records based on job performance and what they're doing for their mission. If they're, for example, in the executive suite, their records and their emails are going to be needed for perhaps future litigation, for perhaps what have you, compared to another individual whose records or emails might not necessarily be needed. So it's kind of that issue in play where Capstone for a large agency really helps out. And there you have it was rather easy, the formulation of a new retention policies based on the Capstone policies, and it went over rather smoothly. I don't know how it occurred with other agencies, and I will definitely reiterate one thing that Bethany Cron had stated with regard to the one specific issue in the problem with PIV cards. That is a big issue. I don't know if the federal government has resolved, their National Archives has really resolved that issue yet, but when I was at both these places, it was a major problem. And I'm hoping one day maybe to hear more about how we're going to solve that. I really don't have anything more to say. I see it's already after 11:30. So if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you so much, Joel. That was very interesting. That was like.
Sorry, I thought I was kind of under the gun, and I didn't want to go too much over the 11:30 hour, so I had to cut it short.
Yeah. So guys, we're opening the door to your unmute yourselves. We're not necessarily asking to ask some of the questions. For those who could still stay and have some burning questions about the implementation of Capstone and other questions as well. We still have some of the guys with us. We still have Ren, we still have Beth, Kevin, Erica. Microsoft is still here. Yes, please unmute yourselves and just ask the question.
Maria, it's Ren. Hi. Just a big thanks to Beth, to Kevin, to Joel. Fascinating. I've been fascinated by NARA since I first heard about it. It's a question, actually, Maria, that's been mentioned a couple of times in the chat. When we said we're doing the recording of this, and obviously we wanted the recording to extract pertinent things from the commentary, is there a way to actually make the recording available without perhaps the chat or with named individuals, or should we take that away as a thought? One or two people.
At my first response is there will be no recording. because there are some private information that has been shared. However, I will check if we could edit the recording so some of those that has been shared, which are a bit sensitive, can be removed. But as of the moment, Catherine is going
which is absolutely fair
transcription.
enough, because Erica, of course, stated quite clearly, and remember, everyone, it's just amongst ourselves what we have heard today. Absolutely right.
We will see what we could. We will have a bit of a chat behind as to what we could share with everyone. Maybe some of the things. Guys, any more questions? James, is there? I'm losing all the. There's so many.
Otherwise, there's just one final thing I was going to say as well, Maria, which is we will be reaching out to our membership, to this community of people. And thank you for your time, but we'll be reaching out particularly around anything we can discuss further through the CAB environment with Microsoft. So any particular features you're interested in, to see if they're already in development or that there's something to get on the wish list somewhere.
Yes, that is correct. I think my thing is, as I said, we often undermine the interest of people with this roundtables, and an hour and a half is definitely not enough for this one. One of the things that we would say, and thank you, Joel, as well, because one thing that is very certain from all the chats and everything is there will be another one. Something that has come up already, and we've been chatting with Nikki, Beth, your counterparts in the UK National Archives as well. There is a lot of chat around digital preservation, because this discussion spans such a long period of time, and considering how technologies change within that period of time, yes, it's so nice to find out about the technology changes that we have right now. But remember, those that transfer into the National Archives and preservation are things that have been existed when older technologies are there. So there's kind of a catch up that's going on, that is happening. So it's more like, so should we update the archiving as well to keep up with the technology of the now? There's so many moving parts to this, and totally just undermined how big an issue this is for quite a number of organizations, quite a number of records managers, and as we found out at our last session, IT just deletes it because it's no longer a problem as well. I think that's what happened at the last one. So thank you very much, everybody. Joel, somebody is referring to you as Nikki. It's actually Joel Westphal there. That's Joel.
This is my daughter's laptop that I had to create at the last minute. So my name is Joel. If you want to get in touch with me, just contact IRMS and they can share my government email with you. Don't use the one that's currently listed here. But I certainly will respond to any emails. But it's a great question on declassification and mailboxes. I can certainly answer that offline.
Yes, there we go. So just contact us for all those questions. We're able to capture them. And what we're going to do after this, though, is, as I mentioned, I will capture all of the chats. These are what we have. These are golden for us. These are golden for Microsoft. These are golden for NARA and everybody who have participated, because these are the things that we didn't manage to capture previously, and there was a lot of really, really relevant and quite important points and questions that were raised. So I am so glad that we have Teams. Erica, a big shout out to Microsoft there, that we could capture the chat, and from there we could dissect the important ones that we will put forward as well. As I said, this is not the last time. We will invite you again, because we have already been given the path to the next email management as digital preservation has come into play, because there's new initiatives from the University of Manchester, from Harvard University, and from Stanford, if I remember right, for digital preservation of email. So all of that cannot function in silo. It has to all come together at some point for all these to work. And Ren,
I'm just going to say yes, following on from that, really looking forward to that third strand. Again, we'll be gathering stuff to feed to Microsoft. We'll be engaging with the Digital Preservation Coalition around that as well. I was speaking with William and Sarah there only yesterday. And just to say, Maria, as well as all our speakers, Maria, thank you so much for all your hard work in putting this together. All our speakers. Thank you to all you lovely people for joining. Hope the sun's shining where you are, and have a wonderful rest of the day.
Have a lovely day. Mike, thank you for finding Joel for us as well.
Yes, thank you, Mike.
Thank you so much. Have a lovely afternoon, evening, and don't forget to cast your vote today. Those in the UK, it's election day. So, it's election day for the UK. Thank you. It's amazing. What can I say, Ren? We have this amazing.
These sessions are great, and so important when there are different options to be able to discuss and get the grey matter going.
Yes, that's
They
right.
all interlink in many ways. It's how to use email, how to complement that with Teams, how to consider things like NARA, which I've been fascinated in for years. And
Yeah. I mean, Erica, James, definitely. Please contact James directly for all those other stuff, and Beth and everybody. I think, yep, there's a lot that can be gained there. You don't need to ask us for anything unless you want his contact details. If I'm honest, Erica, James has always been quite good with these things. Thank you for waking up early, Erica.
No problem. I went to the Google meeting at first, and I'm like, something's wrong. There's nobody else here.
Oh, Google meeting. Oh, gosh.
I had an invite for a Google
I think because it
meeting.
came out of the Google Calendar, even with the Teams link attached, sometimes it says, "Oh, I'll add my own little meeting to this." So.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you so much.
Thanks, Maria.
Erica. Thank you.
Bye.
You take care. Bye.
Thank you.